One participant. It's already recorded. You can never get the full solution. I know that little drop. Oh, I've got them. Oh, well, whatever. Do as I say. Hi.
Hello. How are you?
Doing pretty good. Been a little busy with a few different experiments running, but you know.
I know how that goes.
Yeah. How's it going for you?
Okay.
Julie's the earthworm guru, Jim. So she's been trying to figure out how to keep these earthworms alive so we can do experiments on them. So we have a Factorio experiment right now with different kind of soils, different kind of food. We bought like 30 heads of lettuce to see if we could get them to eat romaine lettuce or mung bean sprouts to keep them alive. We have about 1,000 jumping worms.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So
They like hostas.
they like hostas. Okay. They just eat the roots, right?
Well, I don't know if yeah, because they're in the soil. I don't know if they wouldn't climb up the plant, but I bet they'd eat the leaves too. Since slugs like them.
Well, I think lettuce is cheaper than hosta.
I think so. I'm saying that facetiously.
Oh, okay. Okay. Took us a while. because we're so into trying to get them to, Lee, bless his heart, wants us to have bags of maple leaves all around the room, which we can't do. Because we do qPCR, so we can't have a lot of dirt. I mean, we have enough dirt,
Yeah.
but we can't have big bags of dirty leaves everywhere, so we have to figure out something, so.
Yeah, we'll try pretty much anything.
So we're working on trying to figure out if we can come up with a way to rear them. Julie, can you feel comfortable to tell everybody your different treatments?
Yes, yeah, maybe I should run and grab that little note really quick.
Medicare, Medicare Complicated will answer your questions and help you find a plan. Learn more at medicare.org/medicine. It's part of the
Hi, guys. Doesn't look like peace. It meant to be peace, but somehow it didn't look right. So we'll wait 3 minutes. What about waiting 3 minutes?
Okay.
So if you have something to talk about, get your thoughts together. Jim and I are going to talk about our IR4 progress. I'm going to talk about, I'm working with University IT. I'll talk to you with their technology transfer to figure out if they will sponsor us. I just put in a little Procter & Gamble grant to support this work. And then the university says, don't put it in because if we can patent it, Procter & Gamble will take your research, then we can't patent it. So that is kind of waiting. So I'll talk about that. And so all of you who have, Angela, you can tell us about the new extension agent who's getting hired. That would be nice to work on jumping worms. So you guys muted. So if you want to unmute sometime, there you go.
Yeah, so I have 3 things. So I'm happy to talk about the tips position, and then I got an educational permit to move jumping worms. So that is like the first time that has happened. And then I recently heard that there was someone who was doing research on jumping worms and prion diseases, and I would love to know more about that if anyone knows. So that is my question for the group. Those are my 3 things.
All right, so we'll just have people volunteer. Hi, Brad. Hi, Laura. So everybody, if you could add a bit so we all could learn something. I did talk to Joseph Gores and his Shannon about their website and their efforts. I don't know how many of you guys were interviewed. So they're proceeding with that. That website isn't open yet, but it's kind of a portal to get people to understand jumping worms issues. Then they can make donations. So I did talk to him about that. He didn't know if he could come today because he has a busy teaching schedule right now, but he is tracking us at any rate. So that's good. So who would, it's 3:03. So who would like to start? I mean, Jim and I can start if you want to break the ice. Okay, we'll start. Jim and I will start. Jim, do you want to talk from your perspective about our journey and what we found out?
Well, we're trying to find the right person, for one thing, has been a challenge. We keep getting food people, and that's a different process through IR4. We did talk to Jimmy, what's his last name, Burns or something like that?
Yeah, something like that.
But and I had a lot of faith in him based on the discussion he had. He did send us a response. He was not very supportive of us pursuing getting Carbaryl listed as an emergency listing, although I don't necessarily agree with his reasoning because it's already listed for nursery crops anyway. And then he had a couple of other options, but a number of them are neonics, and we aren't going anywhere near neonics as an industry, so that's not an option. I keep coming back to chlorpyrifos, but just because of it's allowed again, but that's not going to stay that way. I don't expect either. So we're still.
The problem with Carbaryl is it's a carbamate and affects acetylcholinesterase receptors, and the EPA wants to get rid of them. So there's not very many carbamates left. And so that's why he's saying that. He's obviously been told by the EPA, you know, the carbamates might come off especially on food, because Jimmy is working with the food program. We're doing ornamentals. And so maybe it will stay for turf and ornamentals, but they want to get it off the food list because of this whole re-registration of all pesticides to looking at what they call as the cup full, how much dosages do you get of the different classes, and especially how they affect children on food. Kids can eat like apples, and carbaryl is used on apples very widely, both as a thinner and to kill a bunch of codling worms and stuff. So that's why he has that perspective, Jim. Yeah.
No, I understand the concern about carbamates, but carbaryl is still widely used. It's labeled for industry use, and if it's used, and we're not talking about food uses, and we're talking also about a drench. So it's a very specialized use of a carbamate, I think, and we just need to have something that we know is going to work. There are other things, but I think carbaryl is probably the least obnoxious of some of the other ones that are available.
So the problem Jim and I first run into is we need a liaison to talk to. That's going to liaison between us, the university, and Jim, the commodity group, and the chemical company that has a label to get something to kill earthworms on the label. So we do the research in the exact way that the IR4 program will approve it for the label. Well, the liaison is missing. The person who used to do the ornamental for the IR4 program, Christy, she retired when they moved from Rutgers to North Carolina. They just had job interviews, but they don't think anybody will be on board till the spring. And then they tell us it will be a year before there's going to be a workshop that we can discuss this at. And then they say it will probably take 2 years before anything can get put on a label. So we have to identify a label that a chemical company is willing to work with us. And then we have to identify the exact data we need, in what manner, how many replicates, how many individuals, how many different solutions we test. So they will take that data and put jumping worms on a label. So
And that's
it's
a different
easy.
process. That's a different process than the emergency label listing. Now, there's two different paths here, right?
But that's what Jimmy said was the fastest probably to do, to work with a company that has a label. He said that would probably get it registered first. And then there's the chance of there's these different kinds of exemption labels. And so we could try for one of those. But again, we need a pesticide company to work with, because the exemption will be for their label. So you either get it on the label as a regular usage, and they support it, the chemical company, or you get another different kind of label, an exemption label. So we're working on this, but lacking a liaison is a huge problem. And so we'll keep motoring away on this. So a little frustrating there. But we did find that this is like our 5th conversation in 3 years. I started before Jim talking to these people. I started talking to Christy Palmer before she left. And there are labels for, okay, so we're looking at TC meal, which are saponins from Camellia sinensis, which is a plant used in China to make oil. And so they shred the plant after they crush the oil, and that's what we buy. However, some companies, and they're not big companies, have registered a saponin product from boxwood tree from Peru, and that's Cahilla saponaria. And that's actually available as an extract. And so when they made this label, it's not for a specific saponin, it's just for this extract you can buy on Amazon. It's Sigma. So that is the other option, is to try to figure out if those companies, there's 2 companies, and they have a greenhouse label, they have a nursery label, they have it for containers already. They tell you how much to use and what size container. So it's for nematodes, but there's a good chance that, so I'm working on trying to find those people and those companies to talk to. about those two labels. So it would be a saponin. It's very similar to what's in tea seed meal, but it's from a different plant and it's already been registered. So Michael Braverman, who's part of the IR4 program about a year ago, and recently told Jim and I that that's what he would go because they're registered. And then Jim was talking to the people at the Andersons to try to figure out where they are in trying to get a label for the TC meal. And they, on the website, they have what looks like an EPA register, but all EPA labels have to have a registration number, and there is no registration number on it. It is not a real EPA label. It's just in the format of an EPA label. And we could not find out from IR4 who they're talking with about getting TC meal registered. I've already spoke to the owner of the other TC meal manufacturer, Planet Turf, and he says he will not go for the label because it costs too much money to get an EPA label registered. And so then the discussion was we need to get it registered for earthworms, not jumping worms, because there are many more uses for earthworms on golf courses on the greens. And so maybe then a chemical company would actually promote the label because it's not just for an invasive. It's, you know, European earthworms are invasive too, but it would be for other uses just for jumping worms. So we are pursuing everything. And as long as I'm blabbering away here, the university had contacted me a year ago about my Japanese beetle grant, which is working on a soil inhabiting pathogen. They wanted to see if we could put it in compost and sell it and buy the bags for Japanese beetle management. And I said, we don't have enough research done. We're going to wait on that one. And now this tea seed meal or this Kihia saponaria saponin meal, you could also put that in a bag and sell it. And again, since it's not the individual saponin that's identified, it's just this crude extract. All you need is to work with whomever at the IR4 program or the EPA to get what already has been registered on a label, because it's already been registered for on other labels. And then maybe, since you can't get a patent on it because it's a natural product, you just need a company who wants to produce it. So that's what the university is saying. Well, maybe we're going to partner, find you a company who's going to produce it. And then the university is going to get part of this money. And, you know, I and Jim would get 1%. Yeah, right. So that is why the university is interested, because they are trying to do technology transfer and convince some company to do this for us. So we are trying everything we can to try to figure out how to get something registered. Anybody have any questions on that one? It seems ridiculous, but we are doing it the right way. There's no other way to do this. So. All right, so since I talk, I can't see everybody. For instance, my ribbon doesn't have everybody's. But you still there? Oh, there's Julie. Julie is the blogger who contacts you, writes the blog, writes interesting stuff. Anytime you have a paper you've come across or any interesting thing, contact Julie. She'll send it out. So this is going to be blog number 4, right, Julie? And Julie is also the jumping worm or the earthworm master. And she's going to tell you her attempts to come up with a soil with food that we can keep them alive long term. So we can do lab experiments. So we can do them in the winter. If we're going to pursue something with these 2 saponins from the 2 different natural plant products, we need to work over the winter, because in the summer, these chemists at universities have the summer off. And then if they want to get work, I have to put them on my grant and pay a huge salary, which I can't do. So winter would be nice, so that from December till April during the academic year, they could actually work on this, identifying a little bit more of this saponin so we could get it registered. So anyway, Julie is trying to, so she has some factorial experiments that we just started after doing many, many things wrong for 6 months. And so we just started a scientific approach to figure out what to put in soil to keep a colony of red wiggler alive and jumping worms. So we have about 1,000 jumping worms we're going to try to overwinter. So Julie.
Yes, so we have 7 different treatments that we're working on right now. The first one is our control, and it's just coconut core and the oyster shell like flour for grit. And then we have the core and the oyster flour mixed with just manure for the second one, and then mixed with just mushroom compost for the third treatment. And then the rest of the treatments all have the core oyster shell flour, the manure, and the mushroom compost. And then 5 has lettuce in it, 6 has chicken grit in it, and then the last one has worm chow in it that we bought from like a worm supplier. She sells red wigglers as well as a few other like composting worms, and she sells like a worm chow additive to use for composting worms, so we're trying that as a food source. And then we're making sure that we maintain like 40% moist, 30 to 40% moisture within there, so we're doing that by weighing it and making sure that it weighs the total amount that it should. And we're seeing which treatment will produce the healthiest worms. And that's been running for only about 2 weeks, so. Yeah.
All right, so anybody else wants to go next? How about you, Shannon? You're new to the group. Shannon works with Joseph Gurarez up in Vermont. She's working on this website. And when do you think the website will be open, Shannon?
Well, I know quite a few of you here actually, and I harass you on a regular basis. And Vera has joined as well, which is awesome. The website, so we have written it all up. All the materials are in. We submitted it probably a month ago to Science Sites. It's a pretty large body of work. So we're gonna see what it looks like when they come back to us, when they've built everything out. I expect there's going to be changes, and we're hoping, because like when we did the homepage, which you guys saw, once we saw some of the stuff laid out, we realized, ooh, we got to tweak that. Ooh, got to tweak that, change that, shorten that. So there's probably going to be a lot of that, and there's also some stuff that I just put in that as a stand-in that you guys can check and confirm that this is right once it's up there, or you like how it's portrayed. So once we have a rough, and maybe we've gone back a couple of times with the developers just to get the grossest mistakes out, you know, the large scale macro ones. I think that's when we're hoping to get the band together, get the Healthy Soil Collaborative in one room as much as possible, and those who can't attend, you know, zooming in, and we'll all take a look and just comb through every little bit. We'll make all the changes that need to be made. And so hopefully, you know, we were hoping it would be end of this year. That might be optimistic. Science Sites taking their time. But next year, hopefully early next year, we can get the Healthy Soil Collaborative live, public, raising money. So there's some other stuff going on, and but it's looking really exciting. So the Healthy Soil Collaborative should be a real thing. And then we'll have a whole new level of, you know, how we're putting things together, how we're like raising money, reaching out, doing outreach, building our library of resources. I think it should be fun. So yeah, that's me.
Well, thanks, Shannon, for working with everybody in the country on this who has jumping worm interests, not just focusing on, you know, people on the Northeast up there. So I think it's a great vehicle. We talked a little bit about Julie's gonna work on getting together a symposium, and maybe Erin can help her and get on the grant to get some time sharing, and the two of them can come up with some online symposium to talk about jumping worms. And then we would like to publish that, so your talks are a paper, so you get credit on your annual report. No matter who you are, you have an annual report, and put that on the website so that people can go in there for educational information. So we're going to be working on that. We'll take the lead, but Julie will talk to Erin, and Julie will talk to Shannon, and we'll try to make that happen sometime mid-spring next year.
That's amazing. Thank you so much.
I can
Okay,
share out.
all these Shy people, shy Midwesterners.
I can jump in here. I've missed the last couple meetings, so it's good to see everyone. Julie, thanks for wrangling everyone again. So let's see on my end. I think Angela, you mentioned a prion project. It might be the one I'm working on. I'm not sure. Maybe there's others though too. There's the USGS. I'm working with the USGS, the local research center here in Madison. They reached out to me. There's a vectorologist interested in the impact of earthworms and particularly jumping worms, since they're in the top layer of soil, and their ability to spread prions in the soil, especially at a site of a deer carcass that might be CWD positive. You know, that works into the soil, and then earthworms, do they spread? Do they decompose the prions? What do they do? And so right now, my role is just to kind of work with, they're doing all lab studies, and it's not just jumping worms, it's a few other things. A few other all lab studies, and they're doing the same thing, basically trying to keep them all alive and then introduce these prion concentrations and see, kind of test the soil before and after. But that's, yeah, that maybe that's what you're talking about. That's one that I'm working on, at least. Maybe there's more going on, which would be cool. There's
So it
that.
wasn't hard. I just put prions jumping worms into Google and I found a paper which I put in the chat already. So who would have
Alright.
thought? Who would have
There we go.
thought this would be an issue? But there it is.
Excellent. And then my team working
So do you have
on-
any outcomes like Brad? I mean, like, do you know anything?
No, not that I have
Okay.
heard yet. It's really kind of in the infancy of the lab trials and that sort of thing. So when
And I do
when
think it
know,
was
I'll
your
definitely pass it on.
project.
Okay, yeah,
There was a vet student that stopped at the booth at the state fair and
Yeah,
mentioned she had
yep.
come from Wisconsin and was now at the vet school, and exactly.
Yep,
So perfect.
yep,
Okay, great.
yep. She kind of kicked it off, and then she left, and then there's a new student involved, and so I think they're kind of restarting or carrying on with what she did last year. So when I know more, pass it on for sure. We're doing a multi-year study looking at jumping worm phenology. So we have a couple permanent woodland plots in sugar maple forest where we're sampling for earthworms every 2 weeks from April through October. This is the second year. We have eye buttons taking continuous soil moisture and temperature readings. And so the idea there is working with Tim McKay and others in the Northeast to get an idea of just simply how does soil temperature, moisture will overlay climatic variables onto that. How did that affect jumping worm hatching, rates of growth when they become adults, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, we started last year thinking that we'd maybe just do a 1 year, but it was super dry, and so it was really weird results. So we did this year, which started off really wet and then got really dry again. And so we're going to do a third year, which will be a very average year. We're sure of it. But anyway, we'll 3 years at least. So it's pretty interesting data, actually. We're also looking at biomass of these critters. So you see the increases in numbers, but when they're really small, there's really low biomass, and then those numbers crash, but the biomass skyrockets because they're an annual species and they're growing like crazy. So that's something that is kind of ongoing to inform, general biology questions that we have still about this group of earthworms.
So wait, you said there was something super interesting in the phenology data, I think, but you didn't say what it was. You want to tell us what was interesting?
Did I say that?
I thought you did right at the end, but maybe not.
Oh.
If not, it's okay.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's all interesting, Angela. Everything's super interesting. Maybe I misspoke. No, it's just an ongoing ongoing stuff. And I guess what's interesting is that maybe what I mentioned was you get these quick increases at the beginning of the year in the number of earthworms, the little hatch things, and then that number crashes. Like they don't all survive, but the ones that do survive grow quickly and build biomass. So the biomass is this inverse relationship between number of individuals and biomass, which as an annual species, maybe not super surprising, but it's interesting to look at, especially with other abiotic variables overlaid. I have a paper coming out hopefully soon where we built allometric equations for Tokyoensis and Agrestis. So you can just take the length of these earthworms and plug it into the equations and get biomass instead of doing all the ash-free biomass weighing that necessitates earthworm studies. So with that paper, the most common jumping worms, Agrestis, Tokyoensis, and Metaphyre Helgendorfi all have equations. So that'll, I think, help expedite some of these studies where we use biomass, just plug in the length into the equation. So that should be out in hopefully a couple of weeks. And then Aaron, I'll let you talk about the kind of Arboretum survey that we've got going on. I think that's it for me.
So before it goes to Erin, I've got
Yeah.
a question for Brad. What brand of soil moisture detector do you use? You called them buttons?
Yeah, they're I buttons. Like lowercase I and then the word buttons. They're really they look like little dimes. They're really simple. And you put them in the soil, and then you can have them take measurements every few seconds, every hour, every once a day, and then go download the data every month or something. So it's a really cheap, easy way to get temperature, and the ones that we have, there's a soil moisture component with them too, but they're primarily, I think, used for temperature. That's so.
But they
anyways,
do so they do so I'm on the website, the I button link.
Mm.
So they do soil temperature and it says thermochronon.
Yeah, there's probably we have like I don't even know which ones we have. There's I think a bunch of different kinds that do
Well, I'll send you an
temperatures.
email. I think we'll buy some
Yeah.
of these to put in this jumping worm experiment.
Yeah, they're really
and
easy to use.
Yeah, they're
So,
very inexpensive. We have a soil probe, but we have to move it around because they're
Mhm.
like $120 for one. So I love the website. These are really cheap.
yeah, yeah.
So
All right.
sorry for interrupting. You're gonna pass your
I'll
baton
pass
on
to Aaron.
Yeah, let's see, I finished kind of field work for the forest field trials officially last week as I collected post-treatment soil samples the same way that one of our visiting scholars did. His name is Shuai Wang. He is a postdoc in China, and he collected soil samples before we did anything in the forest in those same plots. He measured pH, bulk density, and organic matter. But before that, he actually went through all of them and looked for cocoons. I don't have time for that, so I didn't do any cocoon counting with that. I will still do pH, bulk density, and organic matter. That's actually being run at the Research Analytical Lab right now. Just looking at just the raw data sheet, nothing gave complete eradication of worms in any of the plots. In fact, a lot of my plots didn't even have jumping worms in them this year because of the drought, I believe. We saw a very strange population shift back to European species, which was interesting. And I'm wondering, you know, if I have time, I would love to continue sampling in that forest to see how it changes back to jumping worms, as I assume it would if we get back to typical precipitation levels. You know, might take a few years, but that was interesting. Lee helped me confirm that it was Lumbricus rubellus that we were seeing in the forest. So I would see that in kind of the more upland half of the plot of the forest I was working in, and obviously in the lowland areas, that was more jumping worms, which would track with Kyung-Soo's proposed erosion studies as well. But yeah, none of the treatments took us from a population of worms, either European or Asian, to zero. The kind of most promising ones, again, just looking at the raw data, not actually crunching the numbers yet, tea seed meal and leaf litter removal seemed the most promising. Diatomaceous earth and Beauveria bassiana looked like it had some effect. Elemental sulfur had no effect at all. And I'm trying to remember what my other treatments were. Oh, double leaf litter, adding more leaf litter. That didn't seem to increase the numbers like we thought it would. We thought that with an extra food source maybe, but that could also still be drought impacts, who knows. So yeah, that was kind of where we're at. Kyung-Soo and I are going to be meeting in a couple weeks to go over those numbers and see what we have. But again, probably my main conclusion is going to be, you know, just have a severe drought. That'll knock your numbers down quite a bit. Works great. And then, yeah, like Brad was saying, the survey. So this was something that Joseph had actually reached out to Brad and Brandon and I, along with Miriam. He had been asked to submit a paper to, I think that's a Journal for Zoological and Botanical Gardens, about pests. And so he wanted to do something for jumping worms, but that deadline already passed, but we still thought, since we worked on creating a survey for public gardens about jumping worms, that we could still do it. And Brandon offered to find funding so that we could still submit it to a journal at some point. We are right in the middle of, or nearing the end of, collecting responses from public gardens. And Brad, we're up to 11 now. Yeah. That includes Brad and me each doing one. So, but yeah, we have 11 now. Only one person out of 11 misidentified jumping worms. Oddly enough, most respondents are finding out about jumping worms from word of mouth, which surprises me. Only 1/3 have actually found it on extension sources or broadcast or print media or seminars or workshops. Word of mouth seems to be it. So a lot of interesting responses in here. Most everybody, all except for one, are in the eastern temperate forests. One response was from the Great Plains, and these are the ecological zones that we got from, I think, the UN or something like that. But it's on the survey. So yeah, that'll be interesting. We're going to close the survey on October 24th. I pushed it back to, because there is a town hall Zoom call for APGA on the 23rd, and I'm going to attend, and I'm going to beg all the attendees, if your garden has not submitted a response, please submit one by tomorrow at 5 o'clock, and we'll see how many we can get. That's gonna it for me. Oh, except to say, Shannon, you have absolutely killed that website. It's amazing. I'm absolutely amazed at all the work that Shannon has done with that. And you're a volunteer, like, for real. It's just incredible.
Thank you. I mean, you haven't seen the full site yet, neither have I, but thank you. I really appreciate it. I just really love these ecosystems, so I will volunteer ad nauseum in order to find a solution that helps these woods. So thank you guys for doing the research and for being so lovely when I bug you. It will only grow once the website is live and I start saying, send me your grant info, send me any news stories. Have you published a paper? Let's have a conversation. So thank you guys. I really appreciate it. And thanks for the nice words.
Thanks, Shannon. So Angela,
Yep, I can go next. So Vera asked about the new extension educator position. This is the same position that we posted for last spring, and the search failed. We offered it to a wonderful candidate and he declined to take the job. That's why it failed, to be clear. So it's posted again, and if you guys don't have that contact information, like, I would love for you to spread the word. I had it open a minute ago just so I would be sure to share it. So I'm going to put it in the chat. Here's the deal though. For a different project that is funding it, it requires Hmong language skills. That's the big bar. And so it's been reposted, offices in Farmington and Andover, so both sides of the Twin Cities. And the jumping worm component of it is 50% time to do participatory science, to do the jumping worm and soil work with Kiangsu's project, looking at jumping worms and soil erosion on the steep slopes of Southeast Minnesota's forests. So in the absence of having staff, I am doing that work right now. And so as a result of that, right now it is all about finding jumping worm locations in Southeast Minnesota in our forests. And we found a couple new ones, I think, but not very many. And I'm actually having a hard time finding them. So it's funny that Erin said her sites don't have many worms right now, and there's a lot of European earthworms. I was wondering if I was having exactly the same experience. And then a forest in which I do have a lot of volunteering, I had a National Public Lands Day on Saturday, and it was flush with jumping worms everywhere. And I mean, even the buckthorn is now easy to pull out because I think the jumping worms have eaten the roots, right? So there's an interesting mixed blessing. And the turkey flock came right through all of us while we were there because I think they're eating the worms, right? So I feel like it's a real mixed bag about what I'm seeing in the woods. That project, though, Vera, so you know, is a comparative soil erosion project. So I am right now looking for places in which have jumping worms. The research team assures me that it is easy to find parallel comparative sites with European earthworms. I'm actually quite worried about that right now. When I find jumping worms, that appears to be all I'm finding. So this whole comparison worries me. Okay, you are nodding. Like, Erin, you're on that group. Have you, like, they've been told me I'm exaggerating my anxiety. I'm like deeply worried. And then that we're going to put in about 100 pins on each of the comparative sites. And then for 3 years, use participatory science to monitor those pins for erosion. That's the basics. In that project, though, I did go through the DNR. So now that jumping worms are regulated in the state, it is illegal to move them. So I was hoping to use them for education and outreach. And so I had to get a permit, and I was successful. So I do now have permission to harvest them from my yard, to take them in a controlled way to a place and in a controlled setting, display them so people can see them, and then bring them back to my house and dispose of them in my trash, as I have been doing and is best practice. I went to do that yesterday, actually, and there were no worms I could find. So, I mean, 2 days ago, 3 days ago, I had worms. So I think it's the early morning cold temperatures, for what it's worth. And I'd even tried to do a mustard pour to see if I could entice them to come, and I still ended up with nothing. So if y'all have insight, again, my house has never been without worms, and I couldn't find worms.
I can mail you stuff from my house.
Yeah, we don't have a permit for that. So anyway, but it is possible to get that permit, and I'm excited to try it one day. And then I forgot to mention this, but I will. So in my call out to ask people to look for jumping worms, a potential volunteer contacted me, and she is a conservation dog volunteer. Her dogs are also registered cadaver dogs. So think of dogs that sniff out bodies, right? And so she reached out to me asking if there was any interest in training her dogs to look for jumping worms. So interestingly, it sounds super cool, right? Shannon, I had exactly the same response. But after talking with Laura Van Riper, we're not sure that's the best fit, because what would we do when we find them, right? Like, so for what it is worth, the next iterations of that conversation are, then we had a whole conversation about whether she should train her dogs to look for feral swine. Oh yeah, Erin's got a comment.
Well, I mean, what would we do when we find them? Just report them to EdMaps, go to areas that haven't really been scouted for jumping worms, because they're still trying to look for.
Right. So the
other thing that came up was like, how does she train the dogs?
Yep.
so no one, so maybe this group knows, as far as Angie and I know, no one's done this. So would she need some sort of permit to have jumping worms like in her basement, and like she starts training them there, but then at some point she has to do like field training as well. And then the other thing I think, like, it's great that she wants to do this project, but is it really more efficient than just sending volunteers out with some mustard to look if we're interested in particular sites? So I'm excited that she's excited, but maybe you all can tell me if there's something you think dogs can do, you know, faster or more efficiently than people. So yeah, it was just a new thing. Again, this is all new, so we don't have any precedents of giving jumping worm permits to just regular people who want to try something with their dog. You know, maybe if she was like linked in with a research group, that would be something too. So that was more of kind of what gave me pause.
Well,
on
let me
it.
just finish, because the truth of the matter is I think she does want to do something that will have action after it, right? Because it would probably take her a month and a half to 2 months to train her dog. So I asked, like, what species are we talking about? And so I'm going to go a little beyond worms. So she could train them on worms, but you ask good questions and we don't know how exactly she should do it. She turns out is a researcher at the Mayo Clinic with access to pigs. So she could also train her dogs to look for feral swine, which is also quite interesting, but then there's some safety hazards and other things like that. So she's considering that. And then I reached out to a couple of other people because it turns out she can train them to look for, there's precedent of them to look for things like chronic wasting disease. So she's already reached out to the DNR. It turns out she may be able to train them to look for H1N5, so the newest iteration of bird flu. And one of our educators actually said feral cats may end up being a very important vector for bird flu. And then apparently they have horrible side effects that are really icky. But interestingly, dogs can get that, right? So then, like feral swine, where there's a risk of a dog-swine interaction, like that might not work. So it turns out she can also train them to look for plants. So it was an interesting, like, I don't know that we're going to get to worms, and we can go back to Laura's question, like, is there something else to consider about worms? But it turns out the whole thing is like a really interesting, like, whole chain of thoughts, right? And if you're interested, she sent me a bunch of research about species that conservation dogs have worked on, and it's quite diverse. It's very common in Europe, apparently. But anyway, so to sort of potentially like summarize where we are, jumping worms are not off the table, but they don't seem like a great fit. So I think what I would say is we're still noodling around ideas. And she's very interested and perfectly willing to do it. And she doesn't need money. And she's trying to make the world better. And she loves to do this with her dogs. And apparently they're very good. Okay, now if you want to go back to Laura's very good question, I'm happy to do that, but we don't have to.
I think
Has
it would
anyone
be
else
great.
been contacted on these kind of questions or have thoughts on dogs and worms?
Dogs have been used for lots of things, as Angie just said. And I think jumping worms would be a great thing to work with dogs on. The permitting thing, I think, is not a barrier, shouldn't be a barrier. And they would be a whole lot faster than people.
So it hadn't occurred to me from an industry perspective, Jim. I mean, like, again, she's doing this as a volunteer, but like, would that be a skill that nurseries might be willing to purchase dogs to have so that they can do their inspections upon arrival or something, right? Like, and not that we're trying to monetize it, but like that was a whole area that I'd never considered.
You know, they have those beagles that you can hire to look for bed bugs. People have small cottage jobs and firms where they have beagles that can find bed bugs, and they get hired by the big, high rises to find the bed bugs, and then they heat disinfest for them.
Super interesting.
Well,
I
we're
think
So
industry
yes, there
might,
is a precedent for small industries using dogs to find a pest to eradicate it.
yeah, and I think industry might have an interest. The logistics would be part of the issue, but I mean, like shipments coming from outstate, technically they're not supposed to be shipping jumping worms, but in most cases they've never heard of them, and so they're shipping things to Minnesota. without knowing about jumping worms, but then you'd have to have the dog there when a shipment came or something like that. But it would be worth looking into.
That would be our main barrier at the Arboretum, is that I ask people, anyone who accepts our plant shipments, to check them over before the delivery person leaves, because if there's something seriously wrong with it, refuse delivery. Just tell them take it back. And unfortunately, that does not happen.
Well, they just don't know. We've had a big issue with that now in Minnesota. I'm not going to say by who, but it's a big issue. I think they should be sniffing everybody who leaves the Arboretum. That'd be a full-time job.
What are you trying to say?
Well, it'd be interesting to know, right, how far down or how covered can the jumping worm be and they still smell
So
it,
for what
right?
it's worth, I think the smell is I think their sense of smell is really impressive. So, for example, apparently in the H1N5 thing, that they might be able to smell or maybe this is CWD. Anyway, these diseases, I think it must be CWD, deer like 20 days before they start to be symptomatic. So that says to me that maybe the infection load isn't super high. Again, I don't really know, but I actually don't think of diseases having odors either, right? So this is like super different. And then another interesting thing, again, maybe getting to smell. So this is a little bit gross, so just prepare yourself now. But when she trains for cadaver dogs, I think it's like teeth and bone bits and whatnot, and she hides them. There's a whole like thing that this happens. But when she was training for somebody recently, they had bigger body parts, like parts of a leg, and the dog like set far away, like didn't maybe make the appropriate radius for the training. It was a training, so you're learning. And it turns out there's a whole series of literature about how too much scent can kind of overwhelm them and they don't like it. And so my point is, apparently, I mean, a leg is kind of a lot of dead material, but I don't think it needs to be a lot. This is really my take-home message. But I mean, I don't know that anyone's done it.
Like the differences between the different species. Like I've heard people say like, oh, this species of jumping worm is particularly stinky.
Yeah.
So I suspect the different species have different smells, but again, if she's the first person ever doing this, she's going to have to like figure out her methodology on how she teaches them, like, don't sit when you smell a night crawler, sit when you smell a jumping worm.
Yeah, and so she was really clear. It's the same amount of time, like 6 weeks to 2 months per species, right? Because I asked, like, well, we do new plant species all the time, and she's like, yeah, I just need like 6 months to two, and I was like, or 6 weeks to two months, because I was like, those are typically way easier. They're like the legislation around them is quite a bit different, but the whole thing was fascinating. So, I mean, I don't want to take up any more time, but like, if this is of interest, and like Jim, if you want to send me a note, maybe that enables me to send her a note and see if she's interested, like how you envision that would be useful. Because I do think she wants to make a difference. So like pinning a point on a map is useful, but maybe she's hoping for a bit more than that. And then if she's interested in pursuing, then I don't know how much in the middle I need to be, the DNR and their permitting process, but if it's more compelling reason and she's interested, then we can go back to the permitting conversation. And if anybody else thinks it's a great idea and wants to like send me an email, but that would be helpful.
I'll ask some industry folks, Angie, and see what they think. But even if it's just detecting them, the DNR could pay her to take the dog around the state and find out where they are. That in itself would be really important, I think.
Well, I agree. It would be really good to have a state survey of what the different species are and where they are.
And partly is because, to be honest, industry folks are afraid to report at this point because of the regulation. So, and probably not them alone. I'm guessing homeowners maybe as well, because there's concerns about property values and things like that. So, I think to get the data that we need is going to be more difficult moving forward here.
And I will say,
part of me is that leap of, I understand like she could put jumping worms in containers and train her dog to recognize them, but at some point she's got to like show us, like, here's 5 different species of worms and here it is finding this species and not that species before we'd send her out in some kind of official role. I mean, she can do whatever she wants with whoever is willing to have her come on their property and smell their potted plants. That's great. It's harder to make those leaps when you're the very first person doing it, and there's, you know, I've never like certified someone as an official smeller. Like DNR has zebra mussel sniffing dogs, right, in our conservation officers. It's something that's done. I was not involved in any of the processes over training those dogs or what they looked at, you know, how they proved that the dogs were going for the right things. Just, I love dogs, but I don't have that experience.
I think just to jump in quick, I've read about dogs and others, especially actually more on the high conservation need species. I think using dogs in like a nursery greenhouse setting, like sniffing individual pots, that kind of thing, I could see real value to that. I don't know about having dogs just going into forest looking for jumping worms. If that actually, I think, would be kind of a waste of time. I think people would do just as good of a job, because you can see them, you can see what they're casting on the cell surface very quick, and you're done. You know, I think issues with dogs, you know, if they have to trek through a woods, you know, there's an impact there to other wildlife, potentially getting and also spreading jumping worms in their paws. That seems a little bit, when you have people that live next to the woods, it's a citizen science project that, you know, some of you have been working on already in Minnesota. So I don't know if detection by dogs, like on a statewide level, makes much sense to me, but at an industry, sort of like nursery by nursery, bringing in product, that might have some efficacy.
I still think it has a lot of value in woods, and there's lots of dogs out in the woods for hunting, so that's not really an issue.
I'd also
Okay.
add, like, if they could sniff out cocoons too, like that would be something really valuable. And I know that, like, I've talked with some of the really small nurseries and growers who are doing like small scale, like native restoration focuses, and they're really into like, how do I find this? And then how do I stop this? Like some of the folks doing tests with like greenhouse temperatures, like I think they'd be all over it. And
So the coons is super interesting because that might be easier to be regulated if they can go into a container and never come out, and you could hide the container, right? So look at your mesh size, for example. And again, I'm sorry, this is a little bit gross and maybe not a perfect analogy, but apparently placenta tissue is also used to train cadaver dogs because it smells like people. And so maybe that's analogous to cocoons and worms. Super interesting. I wanted to follow up on two other comments. Yes, I'm running out of boot brushes, Brad, because I keep giving to everybody I asked to go look for jumping worms, because moving them around our forests worries me a great deal. So like my jumping worm stash is deeply depleted. And Jim, I am hearing the same thing about people not reporting jumping worms at this point. Around Rochester. So I said, well, shoot, I've been using the current known jumping worm reports as a stepping off point to look for worms in woods. And I'm now thinking I should just look for worms on all northeast facing forest slopes anywhere near me. But it's a concern.
How dry is your yard, Angie?
So it wasn't all that dry until, I mean, honest to goodness, I ran out and found jumping worms just a couple weeks ago, no trouble. And the woods was just plumb full of them. And I'm a half a block from the woods. Like I was shocked. And they were Saturday morning lethargic. I think the cold slows them down. But I was like, I couldn't even find lethargic worms. So
Yeah,
my yard is dry.
Drought has increased dramatically in just the last week. So
Yep.
that could be a factor.
Yeah, no, it has to be. I definitely have jumping worms. Like, I have no optimism they've gone away.
Angie, do you have anywhere in your yard with a thick layer of mulch? Because I
Oh,
didn't
that's
find
where.
them in some of my areas, but I did find them under like 2 inches of wood chips.
Yeah, for what it's worth, they've very reliably been under my hostas, and I do think they're eating my hosta roots for the first. I'm waiting for them to kill my hosta so I can rip the darn things out. they've been a little putsy about it. And so feel like I was definitely in the right place and I just couldn't find any. So under the hostas, under what residual, I'm like, I stopped adding mulch years ago, right? Under the thick leaf layer, the spot I usually reliably find them. I think it's the dry, and I think in the morning is not the best. Like right now, maybe I'd have better luck. Anyway. All right, I totally manipulated. Sorry, Vera, cut me off.
No, that's good. It's on your mind. So you use the word that you're gonna put outside pins. What are pins?
So they're soil pins. They look like tent stakes to me, but they're specific for soil measurements. Like maybe Erin can say this more eloquently than I. And then the idea is that you measure them, but they're very precise. You measure two sides of a washer to get very precise measurements, so you can study soil erosion over time.
Oh,
But
I see. Okay.
for us, they look like skinny tent stakes, I would say. And so I asked like about vandalism in the woods, and they said once you install them, most people don't even see them because they don't pay attention to the ecosystem that closely.
Thanks.
Yep.
Never heard of it before.
I have to
Laura.
step off at 4. I don't have any new regulatory updates. Angie shared the news that she's the first to get an education permit for training in the volunteers as part of this research project.
So I've got a very naive question, and bear with me if I say something political because I don't intend to. I'm just naive here. So if you have a jumping worm regulatory process, but you don't have any way to manage it, what does all that mean? So can somebody get in trouble for having jumping worms, but they can't manage it? So help me out understanding this.
Yeah, the regulation is really focused on transport. So if you have
Okay.
jumping worms in your yard, there's nothing you have to do to your yard.
But let's say the Friends of the Earth plant sale, they're selling some hostas and they have jumping worms.
Right. So they shouldn't be moving jumping worms. And we know it happens, and we know not everybody's looking or taking the effort to do it. We direct people to University of Minnesota Extension has nice handouts for these informal group sales, and we tell people to follow those instructions.
So they're supposed to give the plants back to the vendor? I mean, I'm trying to feed.
Oh, like a lot of the plant groups, like they are digging them up themselves, right? So like the garden clubs, I might dig up plants from my yard to sell at our garden sale.
That's Friends of the Earth. It's mostly their vendor. They're buying from vendors.
They're buying from vendors. Yeah. So
cheap.
they're like any other company that's selling plants.
Any other, tent that went up that's selling plants. So if a consumer finds some worms in a pot, they're supposed to not buy. Again, this is not even. I'm just trying to figure this out. So they shouldn't buy them.
I mean, I wouldn't. Yeah, that's the idea, is to move towards a time when jumping worms are not being accidentally spread from place to place. We know that we don't have the tools to do that now. So the guidance is very heavily prevention focused. MNLA has a nice BMP document, that they've put together and shared with people. If someone's advertising that they're selling jumping worms as a vermicomposting worm or as a bait worm, we can use this regulation to say, stop selling jumping worms. It's illegal to do so.
What would happen if an earth like mulch delivery, compost delivery, or nursery knows they have worms, but they've decided they're just going to ignore this fact, which I think probably happens a lot, or they half know it and they just carry on because there's jobs, there's business, you got to do what you do. What happened in those events when they're like semi-knowingly or knowingly selling them?
Yeah, so this just went into effect on July 1, so it's very new. So our message has consistently been, education is the focus, and trying to work with companies and help them find better ways to do something. So we're definitely at that stage.
And we don't really recommend that people get any mulch that's been on the ground at this point. get it from the arborist directly from the tree to the truck to your yard. And Chip Drop, which is a national program, is one way to do that, connect those folks.
And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Laura, but like, if you have a repeat offender, there is a law now that you can lean into to stop them, correct? I mean, there can be
Right.
fines.
Right, we're not at that stage, but yes, if in the future that becomes an issue, there is the statute. or the
Right.
rule.
I
Yeah.
mean, that's what I said to the group yesterday, right? And in Minnesota, the Minnesota Department of Agriculture is an entire different regulatory agency. I would say has sort of a similar approach to weed things. Like the first time you do it, you kind of get a warning and you get talked to and you talk about mitigation and management. And then if you don't clean up your act, then they get decidedly more hard-nosed about it, right? And they have now the power to have enforcement. I mean, so I said it was pretty similar. That was what I was expecting from the DNR. So Laura, if I'm wrong, like correct me, but I was like, we're not trying to like and I have jumping worms, and Laura assures me that there will be no sheriff on my door anytime soon.
Right, or those mulches might have a noxious weed seed in it, right? There might be a Canada thistle weed seed in that. Right, it's a challenge. I do have to hop off. Thanks so much. I learned so much on these. I really appreciate it. Bye.
Thanks, Laura.
So I have something, Brad, are you still here? Yeah, and Erin is still here. So Julie noticed, okay, so let's start. Julie noticed something about these jumping worms, that they seem to make mucus horizontal tunnels. Because when she's going to collect them, she will break into one of these tunnels and find hundreds in there. So kind of like an European earthworm vertical tunnel, these are horizontal tunnels. Has anybody else noticed that? It seems logical that they would do that. Has anybody else noticed that?
Well, okay, I really quickly, before anyone else jumps in, I want to clarify that it just, when I was looking for them, it seemed like the soil kind of changed a little bit. And then that's where I was finding like, it would be between like 2 and 6 adults all in one area. And then there were 2 times when I was looking through the soil that I came across like just like a cavern filled with hatchlings, and I could like hit the side of it and open up the cavern and all these hatchlings are just spilling out of the soil. So that's like, I found hundreds of hatchlings, but the adults I'll only find maybe 6 together. But it feels like every time I find one, there's more than one directly right around it, which was
Are you
curious.
saying, is this out in the wild or is this in your lab?
No, this is in the wild.
Yeah, this is on the St. Paul campus under the mulch bed across from the student center.
I've not noticed it.
I don't personally see that at the Arboretum all that much. I mean, we'll certainly find them in, different areas, but not necessarily overlapping each other all that much. I guess today though, when I did, I had to do a quick scout because we have an exhibit that we need to overwinter some of the plants. And so we were worried, okay, do we need to strip them down to bare root? Yes, we probably do, even though this was a very sunny exposed area that we had never confirmed jumping worms in before. Someone decided to use some of our contaminated wood chips and do a perimeter around that bed. And so there were 3 of them very, very close together in this one small area. But otherwise I hadn't seen it. How about you, Brad?
I don't know if I've seen exactly what you're describing, Julie, but they definitely produce horizontal burrows. I've seen that, and given their density, you don't just find one. I don't know if they clump up. I haven't seen like the clumping up maybe as you're describing, but there's usually several together.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm thinking too. There has to be a pretty great density of them in that bed. I've been sampling from the same spot all summer, and we have found like thousands over the course of the summer just from that one spot. So it must have something to do with the density as well.
If it's an irrigated bed, that's not surprising.
Yeah, it is. And they like to feed the jumping worms more mulch. Whenever the mulch runs out, they make sure to feed them a little bit more so that they can continue to live nice and happy. And then right after they put the mulch down, they water it so the worms are even happier and they can eat the mulch. It's really awesome.
This is why I don't mulch.
Well, I
But-
think yeah, go ahead, Angela.
No,
Sorry.
no, I was gonna say, when Aaron said it, that they didn't see an increase in worms when they put on more leaves, I will tell you that made me really happy, because that's been my approach to mulching, is just to keep dumping all my leaves in the beds that I can't mulch. And so I figure I'm feeding the worms, but I might not be actually increasing their population. So in that way, I was super delightful. And, my trees just provide me with that free mulch every fall. Sorry, Vera, close us out.
No, that's good. All right, so thank you all for participating. Thank you, Shannon, for your work for jumping worm reduction in the United States, and Laura. And so we will make another blog and talk again in 2 more months. And contact Julie if you have anything to put in the blog.
Yes, thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks for inviting me.
Of course.
So Jim, we have a meeting with this university people coming up. Do you want to, I haven't put you into that loop with them yet, because until they decide that they will or will not contact a company, it's a waste of your time, so. But you're welcome to come. They're scheduling a meeting again this week. Next week, they're scheduling a meeting next week.
They don't have much time left this week.
So just
Sure.
say yes or no, and
Yeah, you can put me in. My week next week's kind of busy, but if the time falls in the right spot, I'm happy to attend.
okay, I will do that. Her name is Ryla Villar, so when you get an email from her, Villar.
Okay.
And I've spoken to her in the past, so.
Okay, good. Well, I think I'm gonna try a different route here. I'm gonna go to MDA and find out who I think I know who it is, but find out who their chemical person is and ask that person what we should go for. Apparently the 7SL, I did talk to Bailey's, and that's what they used to use, is the 7SL, but the company that provides it doesn't provide it anymore. So that's apparently not an option. So I think going to MDA is going to be the better way to.
I could not find any 7 label for nursery.
No.
I looked and looked, so.
So I'm not sure what's going on there, and nobody seems to, but MDA might.
All right, so it's that, whoever, his name used to be Sierk, Sierk. So if you go to that Kelly Solutions, it has the name of the person who does that on the bottom. kellysolutions.com, and then you look up Minnesota. All right, here we go. Kelly Solutions, search by state, Minnesota. Then you get the Minnesota Department of Ag Registry, and they used to sign their name at the bottom. Oh, yeah, Hallie Bloomquist.
Howie Bloomquist?
Here it is. I put it in the chat. And I put so this is the online list of every pesticide registered for Minnesota, and it's maintained by that person.
Hallie.
Yeah.
Yeah. They said Howie.
Howie is worse than Hallie?
No, it's just Howie is kind of not a very official name. It's kind of like a nickname, seems like. But maybe it's a real name. Well, who's the guy who's on America's Got Talent? Isn't he a Howie?
Yes, I think you're right about that.
Howie Stern. He's pretty famous among them for bad reasons, but.
Okay, well, yeah, I'm trying to think, Raj was the one that I used to be. Maybe he's in a different position now.
No, this is a different group. This is the group that has all okay, so the Kelly Solutions lists all and this is the person who posts everything to them. So I used to, whenever I had a question, I went to the Sierk guy, who's now retired. There's Kelly Solutions, and he was very knowledgeable. I don't know about Haley, but the predecessor was good.
Okay, we'll find out.
All right, Julie,
you.
I want to talk about your control for a second. So the
Yeah.
control needs to have manure and everything in it.
Oh, okay.
So
We
what a
have-
control is, it means it's what all the other treatments were, but minus the additives.
Mm-hmm.
So the control has to have the manure. So maybe you can come see me, bring the list of treatments, and let's go over it.
Okay.
All
Sounds
right, perfect. You
Yeah,
can,
I didn't catch what they all were when you went through the list, so I have. some
I just
questions.
know, I just heard that, you know, I'm super vigilant about stuff, so it's not a problem. We just did this last week. We set it up, so it's not a problem.
Mhm.
All
Yep.
right. Thanks, Jim.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.